Pacific leaders and the US President Joe Biden have issued a joint declaration at the end of an historic summit at the White House. It's a diplomatic victory for the United States, which have been struggling to get endorsement from all Pacific leaders. Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jedgetts joins us now. Hi, Stephen. So what does the statement say, and have all the leaders signed it?
Yes, well, all the leaders who are in Washington for this special summit have signed it, or their representatives in the case of a couple of Pacific nations who have elections at the moment. Although it is worth noting that Kiribati, the trajectory of Kiribati has been quite worrying for officials in both Washington and Canberra, did not send anyone to this summit. But all of those who did attend have signed on, including Manasseh Sogavare, Solomon Islands Prime Minister. And that's interesting because earlier this week, Mr Sogavare's officials told other Pacific Island officials that he wouldn't be in a position to sign on this week because the process was essentially too rushed, saying he needed time to push this through the national decision-making processes back in Solomon Islands. But evidently, something that the US has said or done has managed to induce Mr Sogavare or convince him to change his mind, and his name now joins all of the other names on this document. As for the document itself, well, it's a pretty broad brush statement which is meant to be used by the US as a bit of a guiding principle for its engagement with Pacific Island leaders and nations as it ramps up its presence. We saw overnight announcements of some 800 million USD of initiatives, although a majority of that had already been announced by the Vice President earlier this year in terms of the money. Still, more than 200 million US in new initiatives, such as things like expanding US trade in the region, more money for climate resilience funding, more money for security cooperation, including getting the FBI to provide police training in more countries in the region. So what we're seeing and what we saw with this rather elaborate summit over the last couple of days is a real statement of intent from the United States that it wants to ramp up its influence and its presence in the region, as at the same time, of course, Beijing is doing precisely the same.
So what sort of commitments, Stephen, has the Biden administration unveiled over the last 24 hours, and how significant are they?
Well, I think the significance probably comes less in the dollar figures, which are, as I mentioned, not modest, but also not outstandingly large. I think the significance is really in the way that the entire US system is now being told this is a top priority for us, and you need to find space and dollars to really ensure that the United States is competing at all levels, doing everything possible to push our agenda, and where necessary, push back against Chinese influence or provide an alternative to Chinese funding for things such as infrastructure and the like. So that's perhaps the main significance. The big question mark will probably come down to delivery and the coherence of the United States approach. As several analysts we've spoken to say that this is really the US moving at breakneck speed, but the thing that's going to be really challenging for them is finding the right people on the ground to ensure that they can actually implement these promises, and also to ensure that they find out what the Pacific Island nations are already doing rather than simply coming in with their announcements. If it's not harmonised effectively, there's a big chance that this will all go to waste. Still, the United States has made it very clear it's here again in the Pacific, it's going to ramp up its presence, and it's here to stay, which is another sign that we're going to see more and more intensifying competition in the region, with results that are both good and potentially destabilising for the region.
Stephen, thank you.